say that every advance in genetics is going to lead to Brave New World based on pure science fiction dystopia, then I think that has enormous potential for increasing human suffering.
The President's Council on Bioethics just produced a report which was entitled Human Dignity, a concept which they were unable to define and had great problems with, and you wrote a piece about that in which you said,
dignity is a useless concept when it comes to above and beyond human rights or human autonomy. That is, if you prevent people from harming others or constraining their freedom, then you have everything that you need in a bioethics, and this additional concept of human dignity adds nothing. Let me be concrete. What are we talking about? Imagine that you had some procedure that made people happier and healthier. Let's say people could get compensated for organ donation. More people donate kidneys. More people who die waiting for a kidney would have their lives saved. What's not to like? Well, the argument is that compromises human dignity. If you put money in someone's retirement account for donating a kidney, you're making it a commodity, and that insults human dignity, and so we shouldn't allow it. I say, if the price that you're paying is tens of thousands of people dying needlessly, then dignity is not doing any moral good. In fact, it's doing moral harm. Likewise, if there's a research on embryonic stem cells, if that has the potential to make human lives longer and happier and healthier at the cost of some nebulous notion of human dignity being compromised, then so much the worse for the concept of dignity. We don't need it.
But there's so many people in that report obviously were deeply concerned about this as a concept. There has to be, let's just dig it a little bit deeper. I mean, there has to be something there that means something to people, even if it's a kind of a folk psychological term that hasn't been properly understood and hasn't been unpacked properly. Plainly, if people say things like that they would like to die with dignity, there's something meant by that.
Okay, yes, no, that absolutely. And of course, note what you're doing there. You're respecting people's wishes, and so it boils down to what other bioethicists sometimes call autonomy or rights. Namely, people have the right to live the lives they want as long as they're not harming someone else. So dignity is something that each one of us values for ourselves, and to that extent it ought to be respected, just as all our other interests ought to be respected. Dignity is also something that we should cultivate in the sense of making it harder for people to be tempted to harm one another and more likely to respect one another. So as a good emotional reaction, it's something that we should foster. But when it's brought in this very abstract way to outlaw procedures that actually save lives, that actually cure diseases, then I think it's an abuse of dignity, that we use it in cases where it's something that people want to preserve for themselves. And when people voluntarily relinquish dignity in search of some higher good, like not dying, then I think we should respect that. The case of the compensated kidney donor perhaps being the clearest.
Values often formed in the home, going back to Montreal and your family. Your parents were any science background here at all?
Not a science background. My mother was a guidance counselor and then a vice principal. My father did various things, including real estate and law and sales. But there was certainly an encouragement of science, especially if it would involve some connection to medicine. But
my son, the doctor.
Exactly. But more than that, there was an interest in from both of my parents in science, and there still is. I'm fortunate they're both alive and healthy. My parents bought me when I was 12 years old the Time Life science series. Every month a volume would come in on a different topic, and I certainly owe my interest in the mind to the fact that one of those volumes was called The Mind. So there was an encouragement, but they weren't themselves scientists.
Okay. Sisters, brothers?
Oh, my brother is a policy analyst for the Canadian government, and my sister is a journalist and author. She herself has a book on sex differences called The Sexual Paradox, based both on the scientific literature and her own experience as a child psychologist.
Sexual differences, male-female differences, cognitive differences, some alleged, different way in which males and females are treated in schools, should there be single-sex schools, that entire debate, that's something you've been involved in, of course. You were at Harvard and defended Larry Summers, who made an unfortunate remark which seemed to imply that he was sexist. Perhaps you'd like to sort of remind us of that?
Yes, that's Larry Summers, in looking at the causes of a very narrow phenomenon, namely, why is the ratio of tenured faculty at elite universities in science, engineering, and math not 50-50? And one possibility is that it's because women are discouraged from, and there are barriers and biases. And that's generally the only one that you're allowed to talk about. If you open up the pages of Science magazine or look at a report from the National Academy, that's the only thing that's mentioned. And Larry said, well, as any labor economist knows, that you can't take unequal outcomes as proof of discrimination, because there may be differences in lifestyle preferences. People choose different jobs depending on the exact mix of money, hours, social interaction, intellectual stimulation. There may be statistical differences in mixtures of abilities that, when you look at the extreme tail, will lead to a statistical imbalance. If, on average, men are more likely to be found at the extremes of the distribution, that is, they're more retarded boys than retarded girls, but maybe more math freaks among boys than among girls. Even if it's a small statistical difference, when you get out to several standard deviations beyond the mean, then it will be noticeable in statistics like how many math professors of each gender are there at MIT. The argument was I think, statistically quite sophisticated. Larry Summers, of course, being a brilliant economist, similar to arguments that I made in the Blank Slate, but through a series of I think, tragedies and blunders, part of it being the political correctness of academia, part of it being some, I think, bad decisions that Summers himself made as this unfolded. It blew up to a kind of academic political crisis. A lot of the statements got distorted, such as women can't do math, which is just, only a madman could believe that. It's what I thought was sad was that a teachable moment had passed. Namely, how do we deal with the possibility that there are statistical differences between groups of people in a way that preserves our commitment to fairness and equality? By the way, it's part of the argument also, of course, is that women are overrepresented in other areas of academia. In my own field, language development in children, it's probably 3-to-1 female biased.
Yeah. That was an interesting phrase that you used there, and it seems to me that I wonder if I'm putting words in your mouth, that this is one of the things that you do in response to my reading the Ernest Becker quote, is that you do spend a lot of time enlarging and elaborating on teachable moments. And that seems to be your trade, if I could put it that way.
In terms of the so-called public intellectual side, yeah. That's right. Often, and it's often just because of the dynamics of publishing, namely, editors like some news hook when they assign a piece, and when I hear one that's a good opportunity to explain some cognitive science, that's when I will jump in.
I made a slight error earlier when I said that this was the third book in the trilogy. I sort of forgot the Blank Slate for a moment there. So it was really Language Instinct, how the mind works, blank slate.
And then there's my book on irregular verbs.
Words
and
book on
rules.
irregular verbs, which
my little friends.
just sort of leaps off the shelves.
Right.
And then the stuff of thought, right? If you had not been a scientist, what would you have liked to have been?
Certainly some kind of educator. I think at one point I wanted